Have you ever wondered why some people seem to fade away after turning 80, while others continue to thrive well into their 90s? Even those who were vibrant and active at 75 sometimes begin a rapid decline just a few years later. Most people think it's all down to good genes or just plain luck. But there's much more to this story than meets the eye. In this video, we're diving into 5 surprising factors rarely discussed that explain why many older adults struggle to maintain their vitality past 80. These aren't the usual culprits like diet, exercise, or avoiding harmful habits. These are subtle underlying elements that often go unnoticed, even in people who've done everything else right. The good news? Once you understand these hidden factors, you can take meaningful steps to address them. So if you've been wondering what truly makes the difference between merely surviving and genuinely thriving in your later decades and how to prepare long before you get there, stay with me until the end. These 5 hidden factors could transform your understanding of aging and help you create a blueprint for vibrant longevity. Let's begin. The first hidden factor that often leads to decline after 80 is the gradual vanishing of what gerontologists call micro-interactions. Those brief, seemingly insignificant social exchanges that pepper everyday life without much notice. Think about the quick chat with your barista, the friendly nod to the mail carrier, or the brief exchange with a neighbor walking their dog. These fleeting connections aren't just pleasant social niceties. They're actively supporting your neurological health, reinforcing your sense of community belonging, and maintaining critical social circuitry in your brain. But after 80, these micro-interactions often begin to disappear. Perhaps driving becomes challenging, so you stop going to your favorite cafe. Maybe hearing difficulties make casual conversations frustrating, so you avoid them. Or perhaps concerns about mobility lead you to stay home when the weather isn't perfect. What's fascinating is that most people don't even register this change. They think they're simply streamlining their lives or being practical. In reality, they're unknowingly dismantling the scaffolding of small social connections that keeps their brains engaged and their sense of self intact. I once met a 92-year-old man named Edward who had remarkable mental acuity. His secret wasn't complicated. Every morning he walked 3 blocks to a local diner, greeted the same waitstaff, exchanged pleasantries with familiar faces, and simply existed in a social environment for an hour. Those 60 minutes of light-hearted social contact weren't just filling time, they were literally preserving his cognitive function. The science backs this up. When these small interactions fade, the brain registers it as a form of social isolation. Stress hormones increase, inflammation rises, and the neural networks responsible for memory and emotional regulation begin to atrophy. In essence, the brain ages faster without these social touchpoints. So if you've noticed yourself pulling back from everyday interactions, or if a loved one has begun to simplify their social world too drastically, recognize this as a warning sign. Those small moments of human connection aren't trivial. They're telling your brain and body that you remain relevant, connected, and part of the living community. And that message is profound medicine for longevity. Another hidden factor that often curtails life after 80 is what I call the safety trap. When reasonable caution gradually transforms into paralyzing overprotection, it usually begins innocently enough. Maybe you experienced a minor fall or a moment of unsteadiness that gave you a scare. So you decide to be more careful. You avoid uneven sidewalks. You stop reaching for things on high shelves. You take fewer walks outside. Family members reinforce this. Better safe than sorry, they say. Don't take unnecessary risks. The intention is good, but the consequences can be devastating. What many don't realize is that human physiology operates on a simple principle: use it or lose it. When movement diminishes, muscle mass begins to disappear at an accelerated rate. Balance systems that aren't regularly challenged start to deteriorate. Coordination pathways in the brain that aren't engaged begin to weaken. I remember a woman named Eleanor, 84, who had always been active until she slipped on her kitchen floor. Though she wasn't injured, the fear of falling again led her to dramatically restrict her movements. She stopped gardening, limited her walking to just inside her apartment, and avoided any activity that required bending or reaching. Within just 8 months, her mobility had decreased so dramatically that tasks she could easily handle before, like standing up from a chair without assistance, had become nearly impossible. Eleanor didn't become frail because she was old. She became frail because fear had immobilized her. And immobility accelerated aging. There's wisdom in appropriate caution. Using handrails, wearing proper footwear, removing tripping hazards. But there's a critical difference between managing risks intelligently and surrendering to them completely. When fear becomes the primary director of your movements, the body begins forgetting its own capabilities. So, if you've been limiting your activities not because you can't do them, but because you're afraid something might happen, pay attention to this pattern. Ask yourself, am I being prudent or am I slowly retreating from living fully? Because thriving past 80 isn't just about avoiding falls, it's about maintaining movement, even if that movement needs to be modified or supported. Movement signals to your body that it's still necessary, still functional, still alive. It's how your systems maintain their operation, how your brain preserves its alertness, and how your spirit maintains its connection to the physical world. The third hidden factor affecting longevity after 80 involves something most people never connect to aging: the disruption of our natural light-dark rhythms. Inside your body is an intricate biological clock, your circadian system, that orchestrates countless biological processes from hormone release to immune function to brain repair. And as you age past 80, this internal timekeeper becomes increasingly vulnerable to disruption. The most common disruptor? Well, it's actually insufficient exposure to natural daylight combined with, too much artificial light at night. It sounds simple, but honestly, the consequences are pretty profound. Many older adults gradually spend less time outdoors. Winter weather feels just too harsh, and summer heat can be a bit too intense. Mobility challenges or transportation issues often keep them indoors. At the same time, nighttime routines change. Television becomes a companion late into the evening. Lights stay on longer to compensate for changing vision. Or sleep patterns fracture into daytime napping and nighttime wakefulness. Each change seems minor, but collectively they create what we call chronobiological chaos. Your body really relies on strong environmental cues, like bright morning light and evening darkness, to maintain its intricate timing systems. When these signals become muddled, nearly every bodily system suffers. I worked with a 90-year-old woman named Margaret, who had been experiencing increasing confusion, fatigue, and memory problems. Medical tests revealed nothing significant. What changed everything wasn't medication. It was, honestly, just methodically restructuring her light exposure. 20 minutes of morning sunlight or bright light therapy on dreary days, blackout curtains in her bedroom, and removing blue light screens after dinner. Within 3 weeks, her sleep deepened, her energy improved, and her cognitive clarity noticeably sharpened. There's also the critical matter of vitamin D synthesis, which, diminishes significantly after 80. Without regular sun exposure, many older adults develop profound deficiencies that affect bone density, immune function, and even neurological health. The remedy is straightforward, but honestly, it's so easily overlooked. Consciously seek natural light during daytime hours, even if it's just sitting by a bright window in the morning. Then create genuine darkness at night. Dimming lights, eliminating screens, allowing the body to release melatonin naturally. These aren't just comfort measures, they're biological necessities. The aging body doesn't just wear out mechanically, it becomes temporally disorganized. By restoring proper light rhythms, you're essentially resynchronizing hundreds of biological processes that have begun to drift apart. You're telling your body, even in your 9th decade, we still have rhythm, we still have order, we're still operating with purpose. By the time someone reaches their 80s, they've typically experienced profound losses: spouses, siblings, friends, sometimes even children. The sheer volume of grief can be, well, staggering. Yet our culture offers little space for processing this emotional burden, especially for older adults. What happens then is what I call emotional encapsulation, the quiet practice of containing grief rather than expressing it. It often comes from well-intentioned places, not wanting to burden others, feeling pressure to move on, or simply having no appropriate outlet for these feelings. Sometimes it's generational. Many older adults were raised in eras where emotional stoicism was highly valued. But here's what research now clearly shows. Unexpressed grief doesn't simply evaporate, it becomes embodied. It transforms into physical tension, disrupts sleep architecture, suppresses immune function, and creates chronic stress that accelerates cellular aging. I once worked with a man named Harold, who was 87, and whose wife of 62 years had passed away. On the surface, he really seemed to be coping admirably. He kept up his routines, maintained his home, and honestly, he rarely spoke of his loss. But, physically he began declining really rapidly. His blood pressure went up, his appetite diminished, and those recurring infections suggested his immune system was, well, pretty compromised. It wasn't until a supportive nephew created space for Harold to truly express his grief, through conversations, through looking at old photographs, through just being allowed to speak his wife's name and remember her, that his physical health actually began to stabilize. The most poignant aspect of this hidden factor is how invisible it really remains. So many older adults appear composed while carrying an internal emotional weight that's literally shortening their lives. And honestly, the connection between this emotional burden and physical decline often goes unrecognized. What supports longevity beyond 80 isn't emotional suppression, it's emotional expression. Having relationships where feelings can be acknowledged, spaces where memories can be honored, and practices that allow grief to move rather than stagnate. Whether it's through conversation, writing, creative expression, spiritual practice, or professional support, finding pathways for emotional processing is just as critical as physical exercise or good nutrition. Because the truth is, the heart that cannot express itself eventually begins to contract in all ways. And if you want to thrive beyond 80, not just exist but truly live, emotional ventilation is essential. The ability to say, I miss them terribly, or I'm still struggling with this loss without judgment, might be one of the most powerful longevity practices available. Perhaps the most subtle yet devastating factor affecting longevity after 80 is the gradual erosion of what gives each day its shape and meaning, what psychologists call daily purpose. This isn't about grand life missions or legacy projects. It's really about the small, ordinary reasons to engage with each day, The plants that need watering, the friend expecting your call, the bird feeder that needs refilling, the weekly class you attend, the neighbor who relies on your newspaper delivery. These modest purposes create rhythm, expectation, and a gentle accountability in daily life. After 80, these small purposes often begin to slip away, sometimes so gradually that the change goes unnoticed. The garden becomes too difficult to tend. The friend passes away. The class is cancelled. Transportation becomes challenging. What remains is time without structure, days without anchor points. This matters enormously because human physiology responds profoundly to purpose. When the mind perceives that it's needed, that there are reasons to be alert, engaged, and present, it sends entirely different signals to the body than when it perceives irrelevance or obsolescence. I once worked with a 93-year-old woman named Grace who outlived her doctor's projections by nearly a decade. She wasn't particularly healthy on paper. She had several chronic conditions and limited mobility. But she had one unshakable element in her life: purpose. Every morning she made phone calls to 5 other elderly neighbors who lived alone just to check in. She called it her roll call. Those 5 people were expecting her call, and she took this responsibility with utmost seriousness. That simple purpose, being needed by others, gave her days structure and meaning. It was a reason to wake up alert, to keep track of time, to maintain cognitive clarity. Her body responded to this daily purpose by continuing to function despite its medical challenges. This connection between purpose and physiological function isn't metaphorical, it's neurobiological. Purpose activates brain regions associated with motivation and reward. It regulates stress hormones. It influences immune function. It even affects gene expression related to inflammation. That's why people who thrive long past 80 almost always have some form of daily purpose, however modest it might appear to others. A garden that depends on their care, a pet that needs their attention, a skill they practice, a person who counts on their presence, a role they continue to fill in their family or community. If you've noticed your days becoming increasingly formless, or if you're watching a loved one's life lose its organizational structure, recognize this as a critical warning sign. This isn't just about boredom or restlessness. It's about the body's fundamental need for purpose as a biological signal to keep functioning, because at its core, longevity isn't just measured in heartbeats, it's measured in reasons for the heart to beat, and that quiet signal that somewhere, somehow you matter, may be the most powerful medicine for living not just longer but more vibrantly past 80. As we conclude our exploration of these hidden factors, I want to leave you with this essential insight. Most people don't fade after 80 because of one dramatic moment or single medical event. They fade through the accumulation of small, often imperceptible changes in how they engage with the world around them. The good news within this understanding is that just as decline happens gradually, renewal can happen the same way. One intentional interaction at the corner store, one carefully supervised stretch beyond your comfort zone, one morning deliberately spent in sunlight, one honest conversation about a loss you've carried silently, one small commitment that gives tomorrow its shape. These aren't grand interventions. They're subtle recalibrations that, over time, can dramatically alter your trajectory in later life. So I encourage you to reflect on the 5 hidden factors we've discussed today. Which one struck a chord with you? Which one might be affecting someone you love? And most importantly, which one could you begin addressing today, even in the smallest way? Because while you can't stop the process of aging, you absolutely can influence how you age. By staying attentive to these hidden factors, by protecting your micro-interactions, balancing caution with necessary movement, honoring your body's light rhythms, creating space for emotional expression, and maintaining daily purpose, you're not just adding years to life, you're adding depth, meaning, and vitality to those years. Thank you for joining me today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share in the comments one insight that resonated with you and how you might apply it in your own life, or share it with someone you care about. Your experiences and perspectives enrich our whole community. If you found value in today's video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others who might benefit. Your support makes it possible for us to continue creating content that matters. Until next time, remember that how we age isn't just about genetics. It's about choices, awareness, and the courage to live fully at every stage.